Once upon a time, there was a bright and curious 6-year-old girl named Emily. With her big, expressive eyes and boundless energy, Emily had a way of bringing joy to everyone around her. She lived with her loving parents, Sarah and Mark, in a quiet town nestled among rolling hills. They were a close-knit family, often spending weekends exploring the countryside or reading stories together by the fireplace. One summer, Sarah and Mark decided to take Emily on a vacation to visit her grandparents, who lived in a distant country. It was an exciting adventure for Emily, as it would be her first time on an airplane. She couldn't stop talking about the trip, eager to fly high above the clouds and see the world from the sky. On the day of the flight, the family arrived at the bustling airport, their hearts filled with excitement. After checking in and going through security, they boarded the plane, which was filled with other passengers heading off on their own journeys. Emily was mesmerized by everything: the large windows, the rows of seats, and the flight attendants in their crisp uniforms. As the plane took off, Emily pressed her face against the window, watching in awe as the ground grew smaller and smaller beneath her. Sarah and Mark smiled, happy to see their daughter so enthralled. The flight was smooth, and after a while, Emily grew sleepy. She curled up in her seat and soon drifted off into a peaceful sleep, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. But as the hours passed, something strange began to happen. Sarah and Mark, who had also dozed off, woke up to find that Emily was no longer in her seat. At first, they thought she had simply wandered off to the bathroom, but when they checked, she was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as they searched the plane, asking the flight attendants and other passengers if they had seen their little girl. No one had. The plane crew conducted a thorough search, checking every corner of the aircraft, but there was no trace of Emily. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Sarah and Mark were frantic, their hearts pounding with fear and confusion. How could their daughter simply disappear on a plane mid-flight? When the plane landed, the airport security and local authorities were immediately notified. An extensive search was launched, but there were no clues, no leads, and no explanation for Emily's disappearance. The story quickly spread, making headlines around the world. People were baffled, and many theories were proposed. Some believed she had been kidnapped, others thought she had somehow fallen off the plane, though that seemed impossible. But despite all efforts, Emily was never found, and as the years went by, her case remained one of the greatest mysteries of all time. Sarah and Mark were devastated. They returned home without their beloved daughter, their lives shattered by her disappearance. They never gave up hope, though. Every day, they searched for answers, holding on to the belief that one day, Emily would return to them. They kept her room exactly as it was, her toys neatly arranged, and her favorite books on the shelf. The pain of losing her was unbearable, but they clung to each other, trying to make it through each day. Years passed, and the world moved on, but for Sarah and Mark, time seemed to stand still. They went through the motions of life, but the joy they once knew was gone. They continued to search for Emily, following every lead, no matter how far-fetched. They visited countless places, spoke to countless people, but no one could tell them what had happened to their little girl. Then, one cold winter evening, 12 years after Emily had vanished, the doorbell rang at Sarah and Mark's home. They weren't expecting anyone, so they were surprised to hear the sound. Sarah, now with streaks of gray in her hair, opened the door. Standing on the doorstep was a young woman, her face partially hidden by the hood of her coat. She looked thin and weary, but there was something familiar about her. The woman slowly pulled down her hood, revealing a face that was both strange and familiar. Sarah gasped, her heart racing. Mark appeared behind her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Could it be? Mom, Dad, a young woman said, her voice trembling. It's me, Emily. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah and Mark were frozen in place, unable to process what they were seeing and hearing. Their minds raced, filled with 1,000 questions. How was this possible? Where had she been all these years? And why was she here now? Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she reached out, her hands trembling. Emily, is it really you? Emily nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. It's me, Mom. I'm home. The family embraced, their hearts bursting with a mixture of overwhelming joy and deep sorrow. Emily had returned, but she was no longer the little girl they had lost. She was a young woman now, her childhood years stolen by a mystery that still hung over them. They sat together in the living room, the warmth of the fire flickering in the hearth. Emily began to tell her story, her voice heavy with emotion. She spoke of waking up in a strange, dark place after she had fallen asleep on the plane. She didn't know where she was or how she had gotten there. The place was cold, and the people who had taken her never spoke to her, treating her like a prisoner. For years, Emily had been moved from place to place, always under watchful eyes, always in fear. She had tried to escape many times, but it was only recently that she had succeeded. She had found her way back home after all these years, determined to reunite with her parents. But the ordeal had changed her. She was no longer the carefree child who had once loved to explore the world. She had seen too much, experienced too much. As Emily finished her story, Sarah and Mark held her close, their hearts breaking for the years they had lost. But they were also filled with gratitude that she was finally home, safe in their arms. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that Emily would need time to heal from the trauma she had endured. But they were a family once more, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily's return brought a sense of closure to the mystery that had haunted them for so long. The world was stunned by the news, and the authorities reopened the investigation, determined to uncover the truth about what had happened to her. But for Sarah and Mark, the most important thing was that their daughter was back. The years they had lost could never be reclaimed, but they had a future to look forward to, a future where they could finally be together as a family again. And so, in the quiet town where they lived, the light in Emily's room was once again lit, shining a beacon of hope in the darkness. The vanishing girl had returned, bringing with her a story of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family.